Either the stratosphere is way higher than expected, or I weigh way less than I look. You know, in this position I can see the bigger picture more clearly than ever, mostly because I can literally see the whole continent. So, making use of this view, and to pass the time, I think we can talk about a certain topic which has been roaming in my head for some time. How are the nations of Terra influenced by the real-world counterparts? Firstly, I want to mention that yes, this video is heavily influenced by QaiserMLG's All Nation Explained two-parter. Link up here if you want to see it. Though, we have more info about these places than at the time he made his video. Expect some updates. So without anything else to say, and a long fall still ahead of me, let us start with the very first country we awakened in. The land of bears and everything cold. As mentioned in the story, Ursus is ruled by a Tsar and works as an empire. At first, we are given little reasons to believe they are anything but the de facto bad guys of the story, yet more and more information has come to show they are not in this position because they want to, but rather because they are the only line of defense against what we only know as demons, and not the cute ones we psych into our foes. But being so foreign to our understanding, a single fragment of them is enough to empower one of the strongest units we have seen so far in both game and lore. The Emperor's Blades. These unknown demons also seem to draw power from the fear of those who know about them. Thus the Emperor makes sure nobody ever speaks a word about this fight, to the point very few people even know of their existence, placing the nation in a constant arm race and a perpetual need of resources to keep the line, adding to this the constant suppression of those deemed unneeded for the Empire, namely the infected and whatever small country they happen to be invading that day. It is often perceived that Ursus is an analog to a pre-revolutionary Russian Empire. However, at the end of chapter 8, we come to the next revelation. There was already a revolution. It wasn't as extreme as the real one, with most of the nobles losing their power. If we do see nobles abusing their position in the story, it's because those are but remnants of the old regime, still trying to hold on their past glories, while the current Tsar does what he can to properly deal with them, while also managing their Ulsan war and the tensions constantly surging all around them. Personally, I do not envy his job. So I will say Ursus is a Russian that went through the revolution, but with two main differences. First, there was no silly priest giving the Tsar weird advice, as far as we know, which slowed down the dislike of the public, if only enough for things to play differently. And second, a member of the Tsardom realized things had to change, thus giving us an empire which is genuinely trying to look after its people. But it has so many things on its plate right now, it barely shows. This one is very easy to define, an experimental zone which works not only as a bridge with other nations, but also as a melting pot of multiple cultures and ideologies. Because of its huge diversity, the personalities and characteristics of its people are just as diverse, thus making Lungmen one of the most realistic cities in all of Terra, clearly Terra's analog to Hong Kong. But while the real one is an experimental zone, Lungmen seems to have been the passion project of its current ruler, Chief Executive Wei Yenwu. The city already existed, but it was Yenwu who brought it to its current splendor, as expected of a member of Jan's royal family. There are just too many things to mention about this man, so I might end up making a video about him once enough info is out. So for now, let's leave it here. Because of all of this, we can confirm that this place will be important for the rest of the story. By a long time, we knew very little about the second biggest nation in Terra, often giving an air of mystery and isolation, which made some believe the country to be based on China during the Qing dynasty, given how inactive their government seemed to be for outsiders. However, new information has told us that they are far from inactive. In fact, they could be categorized as the most in the known realm in all of Terra, as they have shown to know about the demons in the north, Columbia's expansionism, and even the threat of the Seaborn, marking the Tang dynasty as Jan's probable influence, as it was the time period in which pre-revolutionary China was at its peak. Regarding Jan people itself, it is a bit hard to point out, since the place is so big and we have very little interaction with its inhabitants besides those from Lungmen. But of what little we have been shown, it is safe to assume their government is perhaps the most balanced of them all, or in simpler terms, they seem to got their shit together the most out of everyone in Terra. Though that doesn't mean they don't have their harsh tendencies, as we have seen in their treatment of the infected and their perspective toward the rest of the world. Founded as a place for anyone to enjoy themselves, Siesta is known mostly as a touristic spot more than anything, aided by its gigantic salt lake, its volcano, or the fire festival. The place is meant for partying and relaxation, nothing much more to say. Besides the one bad apple to fall during the heart of surging flame, Siesta is one of the few places with little in regard of political plots. While it has a dark past, current day Siesta is as peaceful as it can be. Most seem to see it as an analog to Hawaii, due to its aesthetics and apparent closeness with the Colombian government. But I think it's more of a mix between Hawaii and the Mediterranean archipelago as a whole, as they do have an history with volcanoes. Not to mention the founder's last name seems Greek in origin. And nothing else to say, but by the end of the event, Siesta to become a nomadic city. While we have yet to get a proper event in Syracuse, we have gotten some info about the place from little shoutouts here and there, mainly from Code of Brawl and most operators hailing from there. What we know is that it was founded by a she-wolf and her 7 children, whose clans will go and become the 7 families which will become Syracuse properly. So one of said families will be absorbed into the largest one, thus renaming them into the Safe Famiglia. Besides this, we also know the family seem to be going through some sort of restructuration. Via Cold War or aggressive takeovers is yet unknown, but the friction is sure to boil to an all-out conflict sooner or later, meaning Rhodes is destined to cross paths with them sooner or later. As where there is turmoil, there will be Rhodes Island. Nice catchphrase. While its connection with real-life Italy is pretty obvious, to the point its founding myth is identical to that of Rome, Syracuse seems to be based on the Italy from around the middle of the 1900s, which were ruled by the families shortly after the deposition of Benito Mussolini, who had such bad press, nobody cared when the mafia took over the government. While Italy's case happened as a consequence of worldwide events, Syracuse seems to have been this way since its founding, with events between the mafias being a somewhat new development, as the regular Syracusan citizens doesn't seem to know of the current turmoil between the families. For now, I am really looking forward to the time we can actually set foot in the land of the fluffy tales. Land of arts, be it musical, cultural, of the blow you into pieces kind, Litania is the place where these are developed to its fullest. But while most countries study arts scientifically, Litania looks at it from a more mystical angle, to the point its previous monarch, the feared Witch King, ruled over the whole kingdom with the use of his arts alone. Now dethroned and replaced with the twin empresses, the nation of Litania seems to be in a period of transition, moving on from their previous tyrannical rule into a more permissive one. Though I wouldn't call it much of an improvement, more like a change in management. While still segregated, the infected are now treated a bit better than when the king was alive. As many may have guessed, Litania's counterpart is Germany, or rather the German Confederation, which was followed by the Germanic Empire. See the parallels? Which had its capital in Austria, worldly renowned for its arts. However, Litania's event, Lingering Echoes, has yet to reach global. Thus, I cannot go further than what we know, since I don't want to get spoiled. As mentioned, Litania is currently adopting a new culture, away from the previous regime. So while we are too late to witness the event which marked an after in the country, it is safe to say that this land has still many tales to tell. One of the first nations we learned of at the beginning of the game thanks to Operator Santala, and yet we know very little about it. One of the few fully natural lands in Terra whose inhabitants make use of what is considered to be ancient ritualistic arts. Since very little is known of the place, I cannot say much about its people. Hopefully, this will change in the near future. All I can add is that the region may be influenced by real-life Sami culture and the Fennoscandia Peninsula. Ironically, it is in this region that we found the real world's Lapland, which might imply that, while Syracusan to the bone, Lapi might be of Sami descent. This one is a bit harder to analyze. As mentioned by Senpai, Sargon is not based in one but multiple regions of Earth, namely Brazil for the jungles, Africa for the savannas, and the Middle East for the desert, which makes the majority of the country, each zone having their own particular way of ruling, with the jungle being ruled by the strongest, the desert by the Padisha and their Lord Amir, while the tribes peppered in the savannah seem to follow a sort of mix between survival of the fittest and a tribal structure. Of these three, the one who seems to be the most involved with the rest of the world and the one we know the most about is the land ruled by the Padishah, specifically influenced by the Ottoman Empire. Its people are also a mixture of diverse cultures, giving them a rather heterogeneous feel to them, but a very rich history, with the first offensive against the fabled demons supposedly taking place in these lands. Its antiquity and its importance to the story might imply that this place past might have been influenced by the real-life Babylonia, one of the first civilizations in the planet alongside China. However, other than its historical relevance, there is little going on in Sargon besides the Columbian intervention, which mirrors their real-life counterparts. Once a vast, prosperous empire which rivaled the then superpower of Victoria, and whose influence even surpasses that of Yan. Due to it being, well, no longer around, it is hard to tell what its history was, but connecting some information and loose bits here and there, we can tell that by the time of its fall at the War of the Four Emperors, Gaul was inspired in France, or rather, Napoleon's France, known for its continuous conquests, which were put to an end by another coalition of empires. But while our France was spared once Napoleon was exiled, Gaul didn't run with such luck, with Casimirs, Ursus, and especially Victoria, looting its territories until there was nothing left. Currently, there are individuals looking for a way to bring the old kingdom back from the dead, so while it is unknown if they will be successful or not, this makes me think of one thing. Terra's Canada, anyone? The land of knights. Surprisingly, not Victoria. Because of its naming convention and the use of winged knight imagery, it is easy to pinpoint their earth influence as that from Poland from the times it was a commonwealth. As seen in the Casimirs trilogy, soon a tetralogy, the situation of the country is that of capitalism taking over power, but with its population looking to return to its roots. This is perhaps the only case we have seen in the game in which they always come to change things for the better. As with Laitanian, Casimirs is currently in a process of transition from an overly capitalistic country into one who takes back its novel ideas in order to face the future. And looking at the upcoming uncle everyone is simping for, the story of Casimirs is another one which is far from over. Like Gaul, Keshik is a long-gone kingdom by the time the game starts. We only know of its existence thanks to the aptly named Last Keshik Tola. By what little info he gave us and his style of combat, it is safe to assume that Keshik was Terra's equivalent to the Mongol Empire, which almost conquered the whole continent, yet disappeared overnight. Most likely, as the one from our world, it fell into inner turmoil once they ran out of potential leaders while fighting the demons in the north. Once one of the most technologically advanced nations in Terra thanks to the Aegir migrating to its lands. Because of this, Iberia was the only country in the world to brave its unknown oceans with its iconic Golden Fleet, yet it all came crashing down with the silence, an event that changed Iberia forever. Most of its technological advances were lost, due to its connection to the Aegir, who Iberians blamed for the event. As a result, the nation lost power at an exponential rate, to the point its monarch lost all control over the kingdom. During these times, a new body came to take over in an effort to combat the evils which had brought Iberia to its knees, as well as to keep order in the realm, the Inquisition. Yeah, we all know the joke, moving on. Given this information, it is easy to see that Iberia is based in Spain, specifically during the time of the Spanish Inquisition, but with a mix of the Arabic invasion thrown in. Iberian inquisitors are not that different from the Spanish ones in the sense they both look for those causing turmoil in the kingdom. But while the real ones looked for religious dissenters, Iberia's inquisitors do look for paranormal invaders coming from the deeps, which makes them more realistic corps in my eyes. As for its people, what little we know is that they are highly religious, following the law of Laterano to the letter in order to regain their lost sanity. However, besides these facts, very little is known regarding the regular civilians, at least until more information is given. Soon, we will be receiving the 3rd anniversary event, which will fill us into the situation in Iberia, and hopefully, Aegir. Exact location, unknown. Political structure, unknown. Goal, total eradication of the seaborn. Success rate, unknown. Of all the nations in Terra, Aegir is without a doubt the one we know the least about. We know more of 2 dead nations than the one believed to be the most advanced country in Terra. Because of this, it is quite hard to make an actual analysis of its people, other than their total hatred towards the Seaborn. It is one of the two countries without a real-life counterpart. Instead, it seems to be a mixture of the mythical Atlantis and Lovecraftian lore. Because of the latter, we can only expect two things from this place: madness and tentacles. That might be a boon for some. The Land of Heroes, another one where little information has been given. All we know is that they venerate the arts, combat, and heroism. However, they also seem to be among the nations which prefers to pretend the infected don't exist by merely kicking them out of the country. So it is worth mentioning that one of Minos' deities seems to be an infected themselves. So who knows what we can expect from the future of this realm? No questions here. This has Greek influence written all over, namely of its classical period, considering its love for arts and human-like pantheon. Hopefully, we will get a golden operator from here one day. If you get the reference, you get a cookie. A collection of city-states with different affiliations depending on who is supporting them, either Colombia, Litanian, or the guerrillas, with some neutral exceptions as Dosoles. It is because of this that some think that Bolivar is mainly inspired by Mexico during the post-independence pro-revolution period, as mentioned by Senpai in his video. However, here is where I do have a bit of a discrepancy with him, as I believe Bolivar to be a mixture of most of Latin America as a whole, save some of Brazil, given how its political instability mirrors most of the real world. Though I do admit that Litanian's political faction might be a reference to Maximiliano de Habsburgo. The Colombian meddling of the country is most likely an analog to North America's intervention with most of the countries in the south. Despite this, the people from Bolivar seem to share two similar traits among each other: a somewhat chill, friendly demeanor and constant passion for what they do, not unlike most people from the southern Latin continent. The second land known to be mostly in its natural state and the only one we know of without nomadic cities, resting relatively safe in the mountains between Victoria and Casimirs. Given its theocracy status, one will believe it to be mostly inspired in the Himalayas, yet seeing their saunas, cuisine, and political structure, Gujarat is another amalgamation of countries, most likely of the aforementioned Himalayas with some of Scandinavia and other nations found in the Alps. As expected of a theocracy, the people are fervent believers of the saints and Quetzalcoatl. However, the population of Gujarat are not blindly devoted to their deity. Understandable due to the current change in management plotted by a certain strange operator. Gujarat is another country in the middle of a transition, from isolation to opening their borders, not only to foreigners, but also to new technologies and ideas. Another nation I am looking forward to see how it will develop in the future. Another of the countries we know about mostly due to the operators hailing from it rather than any main event. As far as we know, Higashi is divided into main factions who once fought over control of the country. Currently, during a tense but somewhat stable period of peace, thanks to a truce between both factions, Higashi is one of the most advanced regions in Terra, seemingly being the developers of most of the new technologies like personal devices, computers, and video games. Unsurprisingly, they are also the second nation with the largest conglomeration of Aegir in their lands. Without a doubt, Higashi is heavily inspired in the one and only Japan from our world. However, there doesn't seem to be a specific period to be based on, as the samurai clan seems to be a nod to its warring periods, but its current state as a developer of new technologies goes in line with current-day Nihon. As for their citizens, just as these two different time periods, there seems to be two very different ways of life in the land of the East, either being a heavily trained and hardened warriors of the samurai and shinobi clans, or a carefree manga-loving civilian. Yet despite this, the tension between both sides seems to be reaching its limits, meaning a new conflict might be in the horizon. The realm we learned about the most in the latest event. While at first it was thought that Laterano was a land as piously religious as Iberia, we now know that its people are far from it. While firmly believing in their law, they are not blindly following its precepts, but rather properly bending the rules in order to live life to their fullest. Its population is a bit harder to analyze due to the inhuman nature of the Sancta and their empathic link. Regardless, their country is clearly one of peace and stability. This, however, doesn't mean that they don't have their fair share of preconceptions and racialization, as seen in how they treat both the Sarkas and the infected. While its comparison with the Vatican is undoubtable, there is also a bit of Switzerland mixed in as well. With gun control more relaxed than that of the states, guns form a part of their culture, which they call tiers. So, taking that into perspective, it makes sense why will guns be so important for their Terran counterpart. Though I still have many questions. Top about them, how is it okay to give a gun to an 8-year-old? One of the most influential countries in the world of Terra, renowned by its education, as pretty much every operator with a high degree education hails from one of Victoria's many famous universities. The only exception being those born in Colombia. This one is very easy to figure out, as it's literally in the name. Victorian-era British Empire. It is very well known that Victoria's army is considered to be one of the strongest in the world, namely thanks to their famous land fleets and their fabled steam knights, an ancient technology which made them stand out in every battle they partake in. Okay, I will be straight here and spoil a bit of chapter 11, but come on! Victoria had mechs! Steam-powered mechs! How did we not know about this until now? Okay, fine, got that out of my system. Warfare analysis aside, it was because of these mighty units that Victoria kept its dominance for hundreds of years. Regarding the Victorian people, just as their counterpart, there seems to be a strong divide between nobles and commoners, though if this was born due to the current political instability, or had always been this way, is yet to be known. Despite this, it is safe to assume Victorian citizens are perhaps the more stable we have seen so far. Outside County Hillock, of course. As unstable as it is, the Victorian Empire is still strong, so it is only normal to see the same strength in its people. Only time will tell if they are strong enough to take upon the challenges ahead. Fun fact, this one is not a country in the traditional sense, but a conglomerate of mining companies. While the general consensus is that RIM is based on Australia, it seems to be a mixture of most of the islands once colonized by the British Empire, like the Polynesian archipelago and alike. Though given the desert nature of the land, Australia seems to be the main inspiration. For some time, operators hailing from down under had a rather Victorian essence to them, suggesting that the Victorian influence was still fresh in the land. That is until Black Knight come around, being unapologetically Aussie. Crikey. While the main race being Cautos might be a shout-out to Britain's introduction of rabbits into Australia, their animal base seems to also influence their personalities, namely a strong sense of community and familiar bonds, best seen in operators like Savage, Ansel, and of course, great leader Amiel. While the core companies in the land try to make equal laws for everyone working under them, there are still companies who just take said laws as mere suggestions, thus making RIM's situation a bit unruly and unstable. Yet another realm going through a process of adaptation, far from having a properly established government system and a nation to speak of. Yet all the people hailing from there shown a rather sturdy personality and body, being perhaps some of the most adaptable individuals in all of Terra. As one of the few factions with openly good relationships with Rhodes, I hope to know more about them in due time. Besides Ursus and Jan, Colombia is without a doubt the biggest player regarding worldwide events in Terra. Despite being one of the youngest nations in the planet, it has a tendency for expansionism and meddling with other countries. If a country is suddenly destabilized, bets are that Colombia had a hand in it. With countless companies working in the development of just about anything, medicine, transportation, politics, entertainment, defense, exploration, you name it. Colombia is quite obviously Terra's analog to the United States of America, specifically 1920s USA, which was in the middle of becoming a proper world power by that time. Yet there are also a bit of the expansionism period from the middle of the 1800s, which makes me say this. Sorry senpai, but you were wrong here. They didn't skip the Wild West part. As expected of such a large and diverse nation, its people are just as varied and diverse without any specific trait among them besides the diversity itself. Despite their plots and ambitions, Colombia is currently the most welcoming place for the infected, and while I wouldn't say they treat them as equals, it is clear that they are leagues ahead of other countries in this regard. So, it's something. A nation hidden just as well as Aegir, yet nowhere near as closed up, and just as Aegir, Durin doesn't seem to have a real-life counterpart. but rather being further inspired by the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, with the magnificent cities of the dwarves expanding deep underground, taken to its technological extreme in Terra's case. However, it seems that this is where the similitudes end, as while the dwarf was a bit friendly but secluded species, the Durin are way more open and friendlier. It's not that they don't welcome newcomers, but rather that they were exploited so much by the other races that they decided to just keep hidden from them. And despite this, they don't seem to hold any grudges about it. Given their Germanic Nordic inspiration, we can see how this was adapted into their proficiency in engineering and production of art devices. Personally, I was expecting to be harder to reach this place, but it turned out they just invited us without any issue. So yeah, definitely a race and nation that can't be judged by appearances. Also, so far I've been right about 4 out of 7, probably 5, so place your bets and see if we made it into the magic number. This one is going to be harder to explain, not because of any lack of information. If there has been one nation we have known the most from the beginning of the game, it is without a doubt Castel, a land seemingly destined to be in an endless cycle of conflict, either with other nations, namely Laterano, or with itself. By the time the game starts, the country is nothing but rubble and ruins, and yet this doesn't seem to be the first time this has happened, as the fall of their land seems to be a constant, with a surprising amount of diversity between the Sarkas tribes, each one of them with their respective cultures, traditions and rulers, which in turn bow down to the supreme king of Castel. Apparently despised by most races in Terra, either due to their brutality or their prediction of homeopathy, without a place to call their own, yet desperately fighting for one. There doesn't seem to be a clear counterpart from our world, with two main theories regarding their inspiration. The first and most prominent one being that of Germanic nations of the Holy Roman Empire, which will fit in with their violent and brutal ways, as well as their fervent loyalty to their king. However, there is another possibility which I thought could fit their case: biblical Israel, roaming around the land to look for a place to call their own, with a history of constant infighting until their deliverance into the promised land. As a matter of fact, Teresa's current plan to take over Victoria doesn't seem to be that far from the Battle of Jericho, just with a more modern take and the perspective of those being invaded. There is still a lot of information to gather about this possibility, but I believe that the Sarkas and Castel are meant to represent the journey of the Israeli people before the founding of Israel proper. But that's just my take. Hopefully, we will get more information to make a more proper interpretation. I think those were all the countries we know about in Terra, for now. There is still room for more countries to pop up after all. I will see if I can spell any in the way down. Be sure to keep your thoughts and ideas regarding the different nations of Terra down below. Do you think they are good interpretations of these countries? Or which other country would you like to see interpreted by Hyperglyph? I would love to read your thoughts about it, once I finally touch ground. This has been Dr. Blob, thanking you for your time and humbly asking for a like, share and subscribe, so one day we can make a land of our own. Until then, stay healthy everyone.